I wanted to give you a special blessing this morning. Been praying about this week, and it was very clear what the Lord wanted me to share. We come together on the first Sunday after all of these blessings, VBS, History Day, the concert, everything else involved. It's been an exciting month. Even the fun of the fair. Got to meet so many people. I get to pat so many of our Bible school kids as they came through the front gate yesterday afternoon. It was very cool. I want to be a blessing to you because we have to put into context a lot of the testimonies and things that we heard last week. We heard of miracles of addictions that have been broken, the healing of illnesses, the grace of carrying people through their final illness. We had all kinds of Paul Slater talking about being wounded as he came here as pastor, and then having the congregation and his own personal ministry find healing as we work together. All kinds of situations in which we've seen God's hand working through this congregation. And so this morning I wanted to kind of bring all the pieces together. I want to tie it all up to help you understand what it all means to us. What it means to the future of the John Day Church. All right? And here's the scripture I'm going to use. It comes from Luke, the 8th chapter. If you want to turn to that, you can. We're going to start with verse 40. Luke 8. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, and they were all expecting him. A man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. I want you to think about this. This was a mob. This was not just a group of friends walking on a leisurely stroll down the road someplace to visit. This is a mob scene. They are wanting to know what's going to happen. They don't want to get far enough away that they can't hear and see and be a part of it. They are eager to be as close to Jesus as possible, and he's nearly crushed. And a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus said. Then they all denied it, and Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at Jesus' feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And then Jesus, said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While Jesus was still speaking, someone from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler, came, saying, "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she'll be healed." And when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him, except Peter, John, and James, and the children's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, But he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. You say, how does that relate to History Day? I don't see the connection. Listen to this. There is always hope. Did you hear all the pastors? Did you hear what they had to say? God always validates people of hope. There is always hope. There is always hope. I'll say it again. There's always hope. Amen. You say, oh, you just don't understand, Pastor Bob. You don't understand. Things in my house get pretty tough. It's been that way for a long time. How can I have hope there? In this story, there are two stories woven right together. Both have one single theme. They were both hopeless situations. They were hopeless situations that no one could fix. Jairus was the ruler of the synagogue. If there was anybody who had resources enough to call in the right people with the right medical knowledge, the right expertise to help his daughter, he had the resources to do it. There wasn't anybody. The prognosis was grim. Jesus, if you don't come, my child is going to die. And so Jesus started his walk to Jairus' house. The crowds were crushing in all around. And then, in the middle of all of that clamor, there's a woman sneaking through the crowd, trying to find a way to penetrate this cocoon of people who had surrounded him. And in her desperation, she reached through the crowd, reached through the legs, reached through the sandals, reached through the dirt to grab a hold, just to touch a hold of the hem of his garment. You haven't remember where the hem is? It's not the hem up here. It's the hem down here. Where did she have to be to get a hold of his hem? She could have been crushed. But in her despair, and in her pain, and in her agony, she wiggled through just to get a touch. And she was healed. The Gospel of Mark, 5th chapter, 23rd verse, says a lot more detail about this. She'd spent everything. She had invested every single drop of her wealth, her finances, her strength, and instead of getting better, Mark says it very clearly, she just kept getting worse. She was on the downhill slide. And she was without hope. In that time period, in that way of that society, she was as much like a leper as anyone that you'll ever run into. She was untouchable. She was a lady that no one could respect. They all felt like God had condemned her and cursed her. She was an outcast. And she was penniless. And she was out of options. I want you to hear this with all of your heart. Not your ears. I want you to listen with your heart. There are people just outside that door who feel the same way about their lives. We are up against it. Not necessarily my child is sick, or not that I'm just down with this terrible illness, or I'm facing financial disaster. I'm facing the kind of pressure in my job that could actually end my career. I am facing situations that I am within my family that I don't know how it could ever be resolved. I have tried and tried and tried and tried again and have failed again and again and again. How do I have the courage to try again? Hopelessness is epidemic. Now, there's a whole lot of people who deal with hopelessness by just getting mad, getting angry, getting all bitter. I'm going to take things in control of my own self. I'll get this thing fixed. I'll vote for the right candidate, and it'll all be right. I'll back the right people, and they'll do it just like I want it done. And my friends, it's only going to lead to more hopelessness. And I'm sorry I have to give you that bad news. If you're pinning your hopes, your desires on anything other than Jesus Christ, you're going to end up disappointed and feeling even more hopeless. And in this lady's case, even more worthless. And in Jerry's case, even more desperate. Like the door is already closed. But God said there's always hope. You wonder why Jesus stopped the whole crowd when he felt someone touch the hem of his garment and power go out of him. I'll give you a little clue. When that woman got back home, well, she could very well have felt like she stole something from the Lord. Without his knowing, she grabbed something that didn't belong to her. And in the end, she could end up more damaged, more sick, and more remorseful than what she had been when she was physically ill. Jesus did not just heal her physically, he healed her emotionally, socially, and psychologically. You, my child, are an object of my love. I intentionally give you your healing. You didn't take anything from me that I have not given you. Think about it. When was the last time you looked into someone's hopeless eyes and said, "You're God's favorite child"? Remember. Remember. You're God's favorite child. God doesn't have to pretend anything. You are his favorite. And when he smiles at you and say, "Go and rejoice in your healing," you can say, "Thank you, Lord. I will accept your gift of love." And then we can celebrate the miraculous love of Jesus Christ. But the day wasn't over, and so he had to go to Jairus' house. And they came with the bad news. They didn't have all the tools that we have today to check the pulse and the blood pressure and all the other kind of things. There was no monitor flatlining or anything like we would have in an ICU today. They were pretty good about knowing when life was gone. And they came and said, "The battle's over. Your daughter's gone." Imagine what Jairus was thinking. Oh, if that lady hadn't just interrupted us. Do you ever feel like somebody else got in your way and got your blessing? Oh man, if it had just been a little bit different, or just a little bit early, or just a little bit later, it would have just been just... God doesn't work on a time clock like we do. Jesus was never, ever late for an appointment, not even here. It did not have to be blood pressure in just the right area in order for this girl to be healed. It didn't have to be just the right, temperature and pulse. He's going to take care of her no matter what. And when they came in, the flutes were playing. If you read the Gospel of Mark, you'll see that they were already starting the funeral procession. They were gathering the mourners. It was quite a show. Man, I'll tell you, a funeral in Jesus' day was a community event. The entire community had gathered around this ruler of the synagogue, the chairman of the board at the local synagogue, to grieve the loss of his daughter. I wish I could perform for you the kind of screaming wail that happens in the mourners in the Jewish funeral. It's ear-piercing. And the more notable the person is, the more wailers come to mourn, the more ear-piercing it is. Not even the concert last night down at the amphitheater could come close. It was piercing, and Jesus said, unnecessary. I want you to listen to this very carefully. We all have needs we want to see happen. We all have prayer needs. Every single week we sit here and go down through our list. Would you please heal this one? Would you comfort this one? Would you take care of this need? Would you go through it? And I got to be honest with you. In Jesus' day, not every single person who was sick was healed. Not every single crippled person was straightened out and made to walk again. Not every person who was at the verge of death was brought back to life. God could, at the snap of a finger, have fixed every illness. He could have vanquished every virus, every bacteria. He could have wiped away every congenital disease. He could have straightened the world out to a perfect place with just the snap of his fingers. Why didn't he do that? Because if everything is fixed just the way we want it to be, why would we call out in faith to our Father in heaven? That would be the end of all prayer. You realize that? At the very answering of our prayer, it would have meant that every single person would have stopped praying for anything. Because we tend to be motivated by what's wrong in our lives. I mean, if we don't hurt, oh man, I got fingers that get really stiff and sore. First thing in the morning, I'm sitting here going, boy, I wish there was something I could take that would fix this pain. You don't do that? Of course you do. We don't want to hurt. We don't want to be sad. We don't want to be discouraged. We don't want to be difficult and challenged and troubled. We'd like it if God would just make it all go away. But that's not what God's purpose is. You know why? Because hope that is based on just this world, it's just on our physical health, just on our emotional stability, just on our financial viability, helps marry our senses to this physical world and takes our eyes off the eternal. Lazarus did not get raised from the dead so he'd never have to die again, but to give us the certainty that he was alive during that 4 days, that his body was in the tomb decaying, at a very real place from which he could return and be the same man. The miracle of healing of Lazarus was to point us to the eternal hope that we have beyond this life. The return of the little girl to her father and mother didn't mean that her family was never going to be separated again. You know why? Life tells us that we're going to be separated from each other now and again. But when there's hope beyond this world, based on what we've seen and what we've felt and what we testify here, we can have peace even in the most difficult of challenges. If we have every challenge go away from us, let's just take Jesus for instance and say the Pharisees just loved him and never once challenged him. How else would we know that he loved us that much? It took the cross and the tragedy of that sorrowful sacrifice to purchase our forgiveness. Sometimes our sorrow is what it takes to show someone what God can do and what is our responsibility. I had an uncle, the oldest son in my father's family. He was a rowdy. Okay? He was not a great testimony of how wonderful God would use someone. Had an alcohol problem along with other things. And then he came to my grandmother's funeral. After she had struggled so many months with abdominal cancer. And even on the last day of her life, laying there in the bed, swollen, distorted body, twisted with pain, there she lay in that bed praying for her family. On that day, on that very day, she took a little boy named Bobby Douglas on her tummy, not a year old, and asked God to bless me. On the day that she died. And at her funeral, Sheldon said, I realize now I have to step up and be the strong one that Mom has always been in our family. See, all of a sudden it changed from, I'll just take what Mom's bringing in blessing. I'll receive what Mom's been doing in helping and encouraging me and lifting me up. And what did he do? He became the anchor for that whole family. When his brother couldn't survive his addictions and his problems, built him a house above the 2-car garage and put his family up there for free. Helped him get straight, helped him get cleaned up, helped him to get a house of his own eventually. Put him out there. All of a sudden, the challenge of saying, I'm sorry that my mother has to suffer and die, changed his life to where he became the anchor of faith for the entire family. Sometimes the deepest sorrows and the deepest struggles bring us to the point where we're the greatest blessing. But you see, that's just God's way of continuing the cycle of hope. If you've been hurt by somebody said something nasty to you, somebody pointed out something that wasn't all that uplifting, hurt your feelings. Okay. Now become an agent to lift people up instead of put people down, and change your own agenda to bring hope into somebody else's life. Like, didn't come to yours right then. If God doesn't use these setbacks in our lives in a positive way, they're wasted. And they just weigh us down like a burden. It's only when we can transform them into positive things that help us to be the kind of people God wants us to be. Did you hear the people who testified last week? They talked about how these individuals inspired them to become better people, to become more God-fearing, to become more God-dependent in their own lives. And the cycle of hope continues. At the moment that we lose our own hope, and somebody comes alongside of us and puts their arms around us and say, come on, we're going to go through this together. the cycle of hope makes another revolution, and another person is able to continue. And who knows how many different times that's going to be repeated down through their lives, all the people that they touch and the people that they lift up. I know we get hurt. I know we get our feelings upset. We get all knotted up with things that have gone wrong. But you know what? I'm going to tell you a story. I went to driver's ed. They did that back in my day. They put me in a car and they said, okay, now you're going to drive. There'll be an instructor in the seat next to you, but you have to practice with him kind of guiding you along. And I pushed on the accelerator and I could get it to about 40 miles an hour, and then I kind of topped out. And he put me on a different road and we'd head in a different direction, and I'd push on the accelerator and I'd get up to about 35, 40 miles an hour. That's about the fastest I could go. And finally, after about the third or fourth time, he said, Bob, you got a problem. You're focused on the road right in front of the hood of your car. You're looking right over the nose of it, right on the dotted line on the highway. You'll never get up to speed looking straight down over the hood to make sure you're in the right spot in the lane. You got to look out in the horizon. You got to look out there. And put your nose out in the future a little ways to be able to keep the thing up to speed. And all of a sudden, then the car just accelerated almost like it had a life of its own. And away we went. I want you to understand. Sometimes we get focused on the things that aren't quite like we'd like them to be. And we're looking right over the end of the nose of our nose, our life. And we're looking right here at the problem. God says, there's always hope. Look out ahead, a little farther. You'll find your potential when you see what I can accomplish if you give me a chance. You'll be able to have hope if you just let me show you how I can use this to bring joy and peace and confidence into your life. The testimonies were not just for yesterday. They are to teach us about how we're supposed to live today and onward into tomorrow. You're going to have a setback. You're going to have a sorrow. You're going to have a meltdown of some sort. I don't know. Probably. But it's okay. God's bigger than that issue. Jairus looked like the door had closed forever. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. And it's not true for us either. We can't be selfish and say, I want everything in my life fixed. Because that's not hope. That's wishful thinking. That's not scripture. But if we say, Jesus, I want everything in my life to be just like you want it to be, then we can have hope.